Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm going to be doing a top 5 video for you, and that is going to be my top 5 favorite authors. So over the course of the last couple of years, as I've been reading more and everything, there are several authors that have really stuck out to me as particular favorites. I was originally going to do a top 10 for this list, but I found that some of the lower placed ones, even though I really like them, I don't have quite strong enough feelings for to really, solidly include them in a top 10. So this is going to be a top 5. In like a year or two, assuming I'm still doing this channel, which hopefully I will be, then I may do an updated list of like top 10 or something like that. But for now, I'm just going to do a top 5. But before I start the actual top 5, I do have some honorable mentions because, of course, I just said some of my other ones in the 6 to 10 range and beyond were ones that I like, but I didn't really feel strongly enough to say, yes, these are some of my absolute favorites, even though they may be, considering, I've read several books by them. But some of the ones that I would include as honorable mentions include Timothy Zahn for his Star Wars novels. I've read most of his Star Wars books. I haven't read all of them. I still have to read one or two of his Legends books, or I guess not one or two, maybe 4 or so, maybe. And then his Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy for the Star Wars canon, but I've read most of the other stuff, and I've enjoyed everything he's done, so he's an honorable mention. I also wanted to mention Terry Pratchett, who I'm mainly not including because I am only including authors that I've read, 3 or 4 books of or more, and I've only read 2 Terry Pratchett books so far, but assuming I enjoy more of his work on the same level that I've enjoyed those 2 books, he would absolutely be on my list because I love his writing. He's a great author as well. I also would include C.S. Lewis for his Chronicles of Narnia. I haven't read any of his other stuff, but I loved Narnia growing up, and I just love the way he wrote those as well. And I would also put in Robert Jordan and George R.R. Martin for honorable mentions, because even though I'm not absolutely in love with either of their series at the moment, I do really enjoy both of their writing styles. I think they're very strong writers, but I'm just like not super duper in love with their series. I do enjoy their series quite a bit, but they're not like some of my absolute 100% favorites. But I did want to mention them because I do really like the style that they write with. So starting off the actual top 5, at number 5, I have Drew Carpesian for his Star Wars novels. Specifically, my 4 and 5 picks are both for their Star Wars novels, and the other ones are for, their work more generally. But the bottom 2 in my top 5 are for Star Wars specifically. So Drew Carpesian, I include for several reasons. First of all, he wrote my favorite Star Wars books at the moment, those being the Darth Bane trilogy, which I adore those books. And he wrote some other Star Wars Legends books as well. He wrote I think he wrote 2 Old Republic books for the tie-in for the video game, Revan, and I believe he also wrote Annihilation, if my memory's correct. Which Annihilation I don't remember much of, but Revan, even though I'm kind of mixed on it in general, because I do think the second half is kind of mixed. I love the first half of that book, and even though I'm not really including it because it's not a book, he was also involved in the writing for Knights of the Old Republic, which is a video game that is my favorite Star Wars thing ever, and probably my favorite video game. So even though I'm not really including that in this list because I am just talking about book authors, he does get some bonus points for that. So I really enjoy a lot of his work. I have not read, I don't know if I've read all of his work for Star Wars yet or not, but what I have read, generally I've really enjoyed. He's written some of my favorite stuff, and even his lesser books that I have read, still have some good stuff to them, like Revan, for example, where I really love parts of that book. And then, the Darth Bane trilogy I think is fantastic. So Drew Carpesian is my number 5. My number 4, once again, for Star Wars books is going to be Claudia Gray. Unlike Drew Carpesian, who wrote exclusively in Legends, Claudia Gray has written exclusively in the canon, and I think that she is my favorite Star Wars author, probably, between both Legends and canon. I just love her books. I have not read one of her books yet that has been anything less than really, really good. The only book of hers that I have not read for Star Wars so far is Bloodline, but I've read everything else in terms of at least the young adult and the adult novels. I don't know if she's written any middle grade, but I've read all of her adult and young adult novels, and they have all been really good. Even my least favorite one, which controversially, a bit of a hot take, is Master and Apprentice. I still really enjoyed Master and Apprentice a lot, and I've enjoyed most of her other books even more than that one. She's written some of my favorites, like The Fallen Star, Into the Dark, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, Lost Stars, and I'm pretty sure I just listed off most of her canon books. But I really enjoy her work a lot. She's written some excellent stuff. And she is definitely, I think, at the forefront of modern Star Wars authors. She is definitely one of the best, if not the best, in my opinion. And I always know when I'm going to pick up one of her books to expect a really good time, because so far I have not been let down whatsoever. My number 3 pick is going to be probably the most popular author on this list by a pretty significant margin, and arguably, I think, maybe not even arguably, the most important fantasy author to have ever lived, and that is J.R.R. Tolkien, who obviously wrote The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all of those other books within Middle-earth. Tolkien is an author that I really love. His books, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, even though I read some other like children's fantasy growing up as an adult, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was the first adult fantasy that I read. I think that was really good for me because it kind of gave me a baseline of like, okay, this is where everything else kind of built, at least nowadays, kind of built itself from. And even now, I think it still holds up. I've only read it once, so I might have to reread it again here pretty soon to see how it holds up, because it has been a couple of years, a year and a half or so maybe, since I read them. But I love Tolkien's work. I've read, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I've also read The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, and I'd like to read some of the other stuff here and there as well. And he just, I have to include him because he is essentially the grandfather of modern fantasy, and he just created such a vivid and imaginative world that, fantasy nowadays just wouldn't be the same without. And I think his books themselves are excellent as well. The Lord of the Rings trilogy I think is fantastic. The Hobbit's also really good. Unfinished Tales and The Silmarillion I wasn't quite as into, but I really appreciate them for the world building and the lore that they provide. And I think Tolkien is just a very inspiring writer to me, even though I'm not a writer, and I would like to be. I'd like to write some stuff. I'm just not very good at sitting down and doing it. But I find him very inspirational because he just poured so much of himself into his work and created something really incredible. And so for all those reasons, even though he's not my number 1, I do have a lot of respect and a lot of appreciation for what Tolkien did. My number 2 spot is probably not going to be a big surprise. Actually, my top 2 probably are not going to be big surprises if you've been watching my channel for a while, but my number 2 is H.P. Lovecraft. The only horror author on this list, and the only horror author that I've really read. I'm not much of a horror guy in general, whether it be in books or movies or video games, although I think based on what I have read, I can probably handle it better in books than anything else, because for me, horror tends to be a bit more difficult to get into when it's a very visual medium. So I think books are probably a safer bet for me. But I love Lovecraft's work a lot. I haven't loved everything of his that I've read. I've read most of his short stories. I still have some more to get through, but I have most of them, and I have read most of them. And I love his work a lot. He just, I don't know, something about the style and the way that he writes, with the whole cosmic horror theme, I just find really fascinating. And the creatures that he comes up with, which are kind of what has become the focus nowadays in kind of pop culture. You see all your Cthulhu merchandise, yes, your Cthulhu merchandise, and all that stuff. So it kind of seems like the focus is on, tentacles and monsters and all these things. But really, I find the deeper themes of his works really interesting. The whole, insignificance of people and the kind of idea of, you don't know everything about the universe, and there are these other things out there that are more than you can comprehend and all this stuff. And I just find all of that extremely fascinating. A lot of his work has dealt with some really interesting stuff that I've enjoyed, like those themes, or things like Ancient Civilizations, or just all this different stuff. He's just one of those writers that, even though his writing style for me doesn't quite work because it is very wordy, he uses a lot of older language. Even for the time that he wrote, the language he used was, pretty old even for that time, which was, a little under 100 years ago. But just the ideas that he works with and the stories that he creates and the atmosphere he creates within his stories, I just find really fascinating, and I really love his work in general. And of course, my number one, once again, if you've been watching this channel probably for any length of time, you'll probably not be very surprised by this, but my number one is Brandon Sanderson. I recently did a video, 5 reasons why I love Brandon Sanderson, and specifically his Cosmere, which at this moment is all I've read of his, but I would like to read more of his work sometime. But if you want a more in-depth conversation as to why I love his work, then go check that video out. But I just love Sanderson. He checks all the boxes for me. I love his characters a lot. I love his world building a lot. I love his plots, even though I tend to be much more of a character-focused reader, I think. His plots really engage me. I love his prose, which is, something that tends to get a little more flack from the fantasy community because it's so simple and it's, not super flowery or anything, but that really works for me. I just like that it's very simple to understand and gets the point across really easily and all that stuff. And just I love the scope of his work and what he's doing with it and all of that stuff. He, like I said, basically checks all of the boxes for me for something that I would look for in an author. And I just love his work so much. So many of his books that I have read have become some of my all-time favorites. I mean, if I were to do like a top 5 books, like individual books, you can probably bet that at least 3 of his books would end up in that top 5. And 1 or 2 of them would probably occupy the top spots as well. So I love his work. He's an incredible author. And yeah, he just really works for me. And again, if you want more in-depth thoughts than this, then go check out my other video. But yeah, Brandon Sanderson, I would say, is my favorite author at the moment. But anyways, that is pretty much it for this video. So let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these authors, or if they're any of your favorites, or if not, or even if they are, let me know what your favorites are down in the comments as well. Like I said, as of right now, I don't really consider myself super into enough authors, and maybe not well-read enough, because I've only really been deep into reading for a couple of years now. But I don't really consider myself really well-read enough to really have a concrete top 10 or anything like that, or anything, beyond 10. But in a few years, who knows, maybe I'll remake this video, do an updated version, with hopefully several more awesome authors to include. But anyways, that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.